Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Console Room 2023. And for this panel today, we are going to talk about the 40th anniversary of the 20th anniversary special of Doctor Who, The Five Doctors. And so I got a good group of panelists here with me today. I'm Michael Zecca. I am part of the Discord team with Console Room, and I've been on a lot of panels the last few years at the cons. You've probably heard my voice. And then I'm going to let the others introduce themselves, starting with Arnold.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Arnold T. Blumberg. I'm the owner of ATB Publishing, which you can find at atbpublishing.com. We've done a lot of books related to Doctor Who, as well as many other of your favorite fictional worlds. And I'm happy to be here to talk about the Five Doctors.
Gabby.
Hi, I'm Gabby Santiago. I'm a writer with short stories in Strange Horizons, The Dark, Clark's World, a few others. Big Doctor Who fan, excited to be here to talk about the Five Doctors, unironically, one of my favorite Doctor Who episodes.
And Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Levy. I write for Englishopia.net, and I've done some stuff with ATB and Cosmic Press, and it is also fantastic to be here with all of you.
And Gordon.
I'm Gordon Demowski. I am a new pulp author, writer of several essays for Becky Books, and I am the lead organizer for Chicago Doctor Who Meetup, and I actually saw the Five Doctors go out live.
I was going to ask that. How many of us saw it in 1983 when it aired the first time? Okay, so let me put this in context for the newer, younger fans. Back in the 80s, early 80s, when we were watching Doctor Who on PBS, the stories would air on PBS a good 6 months to a year after they aired in the UK. All right. So, like, for instance, I had What Happened with Adric and Earthshock spoiled long before by other fans, by Doctor Who magazine. I usually had read about most of these stories before I saw them. And in fact, I think at the time the Five Doctors aired on my PBS station in Denver, I think we were very early in season 20. I think they just started to broadcast, like maybe Warriors of the Deep. But then with the Five Doctors, they actually aired it on the anniversary, November 23rd, 83. We got it at 9:30 p.m. in Denver. I'm not sure what time they aired in your cities. This was Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And for me, it became a pre-Thanksgiving tradition to steel myself for the anxiety I was going to deal with relatives the next day to rewatch the Five Doctors from my off-air recording. So yeah, I actually was introduced to Turlough through this story. I didn't see his arc until after the Five Doctors aired, which is pretty cool. So, all right. That having gotten out of the way, let's talk about the story.
Well, I'll just throw in one thing because I'm one of the two of us here apparently that didn't see it.
Yeah.
When I didn't start watching Doctor Who in a dedicated fashion until 1987. So that's why I missed that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a similar experience in the sense that because the Five Doctors became virtually every pledge station in the United States' go-to for like a good, fun episode with a lot of stuff in it to run during a pledge break, they would frequently break up wherever they were in the run. And when they hit a pledge drive, they'd throw the Five Doctors on. I was hit in the face with that for the first time while I was just getting used to. I was being introduced to the show on two stations. I live in Maryland, outside of Baltimore, and the Maryland station was running Colin Baker at night. That's when I started. And then I found out Sunday the DC station was also running Doctor Who, but when I put it on, it was a black and white show, and I thought, what's this? And it was a Pertwee, it was Ambassadors of Death. So for a while, I was watching two eras simultaneously and starting to knit everything together. But somewhere in there in those first 6 months or so, there was a pledge drive and the Five Doctors was on. And to me, this was the most amazing gift. I was like, I'm getting a crash course in massive amounts of Doctor Who history I haven't seen yet, including, like you, meeting Turlough for the first time, meeting lots of those people for the first time, and then realizing that, well, I'm going to catch back up around to figure out how all this connects.
Yeah.
And I ran to the local comic store, and I also was buying tons of Target novels back then and reading them before I saw the stories. And I read the Five Doctors novels, probably one of the first ones I picked up. So this story was a big early thing for me too, about really getting into and understanding like the scope of the universe I was starting to.
Nice. One thing I forgot to mention when I was saying before too, it aired on November 23rd in the States. It actually didn't air until I think November 25th in the UK.
And they never
So-
let us forget it.
Yeah, yeah. It was the first time we actually got to see an episode even at the same time, but it was actually before the UK did.
So I was in high school at the time, and I was our PBS station. I started it with Underworld with Tom Baker, and then we have a Doctor Who club, and I went to the meetings, and I picked up, I think, Modern Undead and Terminus, and then a couple more Bakers, and I was at the same time getting the Doctor Who magazine and the Target books, and then our PBS station, stopped Tom Baker in its tracks and showed it on that night. But what was great for me was I could actually see and hear the first two Doctors, at least the brief clip of Hartnell. And so that was exciting. I was like, oh, because at that point I had Tom Baker and Davison and a little bit of Pertwee, right? So the Five Doctors was in many ways a gateway to going back that, I had a little bit of with the Target books and some of the Peter Hating, Doctor Who Celebration. But it gave, physical textures to some of these people and characters and things. And that was cool, right? Especially, in 1983, you're like, I have no idea what some of this is, but man, it's cool, right? I had no idea the Third Doctor had a boss ride, right? Okay, that's cool. And I got to see a little bit of, like we never saw Susan before. We never really seen Frasier or Wendy. So that's what was cool for me, was even the smallest little cameos were amazing. And it was like seeing a Dorian. I imagine it's the closest thing that I will get to experiencing Who in the same way that a new Who fan does, where they're like, okay, I'm going to jump into the old series, and they sort of just jump in and like, oh, this is what this Doctor sounds like and looks like. And, that's kind of how I jumped into it. And it was like incredible because they had it on with a pledge drive. They set the context for it, and they didn't interrupt it when it aired. They aired it all the way through with no breaks, which every time they did after for a pledge drive, they did. And it was always when Herndal pushed the Dalek, and it was always when the Master showed up. Those are the two times they always would cut in. Spoilers. But yeah, I saw it in real time, and I'm really happy that I got to.
I'm just going to correct myself from before when I was talking about just seeing the start of season 20. I believe I meant Arc of Infinity, not Warriors of the Deep.
I
I watched Classic Who deeply out of order. I started with all the stuff that was free on Netflix, and then I was like, okay, I Googled what Doctor do Americans like, and the answer was Tom Baker. So I watched his run, and I was like, that was pretty cool. I'll watch all of 3. So I'm not really sure actually where I watched the 5 Doctors. I know I would have watched 3 and 4. I think I probably had watched at least most of 2 and 1 by that point that was available, and probably not 5, because 5 and 6 were like the last Doctors I caught up on. But it was still, like, even not knowing 5 that well, it's a very enjoyable episode. They balance all of the different character interactions really well. So there's always something for you to be interested in.
I think you get a great intro to him in this one too. I literally am again doing the same thing. I got the BritBox thing on. They're at the Eye of Orion right now. You get a really good intro to all of them in that sense that I don't know that they really thought that hard about, like Terrence Dicks and everybody talked for decades about the making of this and how they had to shoehorn in everybody and, oh, no, Katie's not going to be here and all this, not. But whether just organically or not, it seems to very, very nicely introduce all the Doctors in a way that totally encapsulates that version of the character, so that even a total newcomer can go, I think I understand who that one is. And in most cases, you see the rest of their stories, they match very well with the 5 Doctors. Troughton always used to talk about how he kind of, in his return appearances, would play a more comedic version of his original because he felt like, well, now I'm a guest star, so I need to be like the support. but I still feel like you see him in this, you get a good sense of who he is and what you're going to see when you go back. And they're all like that, even Davison. So it's a great intro, really.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
sure.
and I think the great thing about it is that because Tom Baker couldn't appear and chose not to appear, he was so prevalent in both American and British fandom that it gives the other doctors room to grow. Like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
fifth doctor really stands out.
Yeah.
The third and second doctor really stand out. And I hadn't seen any real Hartnell except in Doctor Who Monthly. So to have even like a faux first doctor, Richard Hurnold, I think, did an amazing job of at least
Yeah.
capturing the spirit.
Yeah. I think Tom Baker would have swamped this enormously with his presence. And I mean,
Yeah.
who knows? We would have liked to see what that would have been, but it works well with him being in crisis and being the one absent.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times with Doctor Who, it's the things they do because of budget constraints or casting constraints where they have to use like a little creativity, and it actually ends up being a really integral part of the episode that you feel like works really well. Like, I think the shot clips work great. Like, yeah, that makes sense. I can buy that. Sure.
Especially since at that point, none of us had actually seen those clips.
Yeah.
It
now
wasn't
we have the
until
context
later.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't until later that we had the, partial shot of released, and then we had the remake on animation and the remake on Big Finish and everything else. Now that literally this was new footage of Tom Baker we were seeing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Tom Baker had come back, I might have been disappointed by how they would have written his reunion with Sarah Jane, because I just feel like that goodbye is one that's just so emotional to me that I wouldn't believe it with that kind of understated hello goodbye she has with the fifth doctor. Like, that seems like that works fine. But Elizabeth Sladen and Tom Baker just had such great on-screen chemistry, and their pairing is so iconic. I would just struggle to see it dealt with so quickly on screen as they would have had to balance it with the other characters.
That would have had seismic changes created all the way forward to school reunion and everything too. Who knows what that world would look like, because that would have been their reunion here, right? So it worked out the way it was supposed to. This is the best way to look at it.
Well, and there is a connection there to Sarah and Tom in that this is post K9 and Company Sarah. That is K9 Mark III that's warning her before she gets scooped by the time scope.
And what I want to know is, what kind of sensors does K9 have that he can sense danger, but no specifics? He's just got like little danger particles in the air. All right, good job.
Danger.
K9.
He was bit by a radioactive spider.
Or it's just a riff on, the fact that like dogs sometimes will feel changes in the weather or something before, it was kind of a cute little dog characteristic. I let that go for the sake of story. I've often thought that too. And I'm like, if you're worrying about friggin' K9, no, stop. There's other things to worry about, right?
But it's so cute that they actually stayed committed to that and said, all right, we did K9 and Company, so she's got to have K9 with her. And it's also very convenient for the 20th anniversary. Like, how are we going to get K9 back in? Well, she's got him, so we're good.
He gets a cameo with Sarah, and we're good. We don't have to worry about him rolling him around in all those gravel quarries later.
Yeah, I don't mind the silly moments. To me, they add like a little charm. It's like, okay, that's silly. The cliff is very silly. I recreated that in a photo shoot with that outfit a few years ago at Console Room, rolling down a gently sloping curb by the hotel.
She just has a real thing with curved slopes. It's just the thing she has. She needs help right away. The Raston Warrior robot. Look, that's
fantastic.
That's got its charm too, in its own weird, ridiculous Zentai suit kind of way. But it's a weird idea and it's kind of silly, but there's so much thrown at you in this. It really is. The other one thing in general I could say about it is I've always loved it. It's one of the ones certainly I've revisited more than almost any other classic story, because if you just want like the dopamine hit, you get like everything, so it's like, put 5 doctors on. But it's just such an insane production in general. Like they just so much stuff packed into this, so many actors, so many cameos, so many references. And that's why we did another panel where we talked about, for those who did or did not see it. We talked about season 10 of Doctor Who that has its own anniversary special. And I mentioned in that how I've always sort of been at odds with the fans who are against multi-doctor specials or get really hepped up about it. Like, we shouldn't be doing that often. This one is, I think, the source of a lot of that, because there is an element that I would agree, if you don't like it, is that it feels very much like somebody just upended a box and like poured out a pile of things from Doctor Who and said, let's look at all these. But frankly, I think that's fine. It's like, that's, as a fan, I want to look through the box. So it's okay.
Yeah, and when
Having
I was about to say, when you're rewatching season 20, there's this, the Five Doctors Fits is a great season ender, because everything had like a little bit of history, but the Five Doctors kind of brings all of it together. And it really felt like all the money and time I spent reading Doctor Who Monthly, watching old episodes, and reading Target novelizations finally paid off.
To Arnold's point, like, having rewatched this so close to also rewatching the Three Doctors for our other panel, something that struck me that I can see like maybe why some people don't enjoy the Five Doctors as much as me is that the Three Doctors does do a better job of giving the companions all something to do in the story. Like, they have a clear function, they advance the plot, they help smooth over squabbles between the other characters. The Five Doctors, the companions are mostly just hanging out. The Brig does have his iconic moment where it's nice to see you again. He punches the Master in the face, which I absolutely love. And yes, I did commission fan art of Kate doing that to Missy because it's a fantastic moment. But other than that, the companions and the Five Doctors are just kind of hanging out more. And if you already love the characters, it's like, great, I am happy to hang out with you. You're great. I love you. But the Three Doctors is a little bit more structural in the way it uses the companions as opposed to the doctors.
Gabby, I think you're definitely onto something there. And even, okay, we had to shoehorn in some of the old companions, like the quick Mike Yates and Liz cameo, and the, Zoe and Jamie cameo. But even Tegan and Turlough don't seem to be given as much to do here as they are in a typical story, because there are too many doctors around.
And I don't remember certainly, all of us probably read a lot of these books over the years. I know I consumed all the behind the scenes stuff. So I don't remember a lot of the details anymore. I'm too old for that. But I can't remember if Terrence Dicks said it specifically, but maybe I'm remembering it because something in my head is telling me it's like, kind of makes sense that Tegan and Turlough don't get much to do because they're sort of the current team and they've gotten a lot of screen time lately, but let's let them step back and let some of the others who are coming back for their chance at the spotlight again get a chance to shine. And that kind of makes sense. I don't remember if that was a deliberate choice or if I'm just thinking that, but it feels logical to say, look, we're with them all the time, but Sarah Jane's here again now and Susan's here again now. So let's look at all the, because that's the whole point. It's celebrating the history, right? So,
although
I think with Susan and Sarah Jane, like on this rewatch, I noticed them not doing as much, and it feels like they tend to get rescued by the Doctor more. But so it's less getting to see them do stuff and be cool, but you do get to see like the tenderness between them and the Doctor taking care of them, and that is nice to revisit that.
And Tegan does get one of her classic feisty moments when Richard Hurndall's first Doctor is finally going to head off to the tower, and she says, "I'm coming with you," and he kind of resists it at first, and she's like, "Yeah, no, you're taking me with you, whether you like it or not."
Yeah, I think they gave them the Eye of Orion scene to sort of give them a nice little, they stuck them in the cold of Wales as a reward for but I think that's sort of their exclamation point, and they have that great little moment with Davison and those two companions that I think really like, okay, this is the new team, here we are, we're done, which was nice, right? I honestly don't think about whether they have too little or too less, because I think the one thing the story does is it flows a lot of that fairly well. And it's kind of like everybody's regular character light, kind of like the Brigadier, for example, is like, he's terrific. And I love the fact that the Brigadier is just like, an ordinary dude, and he's not trying to like give orders. And we kind of get to see a different side of the Brigadier a little bit, right? I like that we see Susan as like an adult woman, right? So you know, they do some interesting things with the companions that I enjoyed, and I thought that part of it was really nice, even though Turlough and Tegan are kind of, you know, pushed to the back a little.
Well, there's some great mixing and matching of companions because they give Tegan and Turlough time with the first Doctor. You know, Susan goes off with the fifth Doctor. The third Doctor Sarah relationship is interesting because Sarah doesn't, you know, the whole teeth and curl scene. You know, Sarah doesn't remember. The third Doctor was not the Doctor she left. And I think it's easy to say the companions don't get much to do, but I think there's enough interesting dynamics where it feels, maybe for me at least, it feels a lot more thorough and a lot more fulfilling than it might be, because it's not just, okay, you two go off. I mean, even the second Doctor Brigadier dynamic, you would expect that it would be the third Doctor with the Brigadier because they work together, but it's this great kind of mixing and matching where it's, and I mean this as a compliment, it feels very fan fiction-y.
Yeah.
Yes, Second Doctor and Brigadier is one of my favorite of the pairings that they get matched up together in this. Age has not mellowed you, has it, Brigadier? Ugh, love them.
It's the same reason we're talking about how the companions are treated. I also like the sort of change up with Anthony Ainley's master too, to like turn to another element of this. It would have been so easy, and this I do remember them talking about, it would have been so easy to make the master the villain. And maybe that would have been just fine too, you know, but it's really interesting to go a different route and take a character who actually in most previous appearances was relatively benign, if not genuinely like a mentor and a kind person, and see that turn dark. And instead give Ainley's master something on the side where he's kind of more out of his element and almost comical, more like comic relief than he is like the central villain. And until you get to Survival, I think it's one of the best things Ainley does in the show, like both from his own tendencies as an actor and what they gave him.
Yeah.
Everybody always talks about how he was very much an over-the-top version of the character and an over-the-top kind of villain. And I still always enjoy him, but I can see that. But in this, he's very interesting. He's a little more sedate, and the interactions are a little more about him feeling like he's not quite in control, which is important to any version of the master. And so I think this serves him well too. And and I see the part where he's like briefly reunited with the Doctor and Pertwee meets him, always going through my head, I'm thinking, what was Pertwee thinking? Because I just keep thinking like I'm sure he's a professional actor. He knows, you know, people play parts, you know, different people play parts, but it must have been something to face another person who's playing like the guy that your friend played. And I don't know, there's something bittersweet about that.
Well, they apparently did not completely get along on set, which is kind of
Ainley and Pertwee.
Yeah, the oral history of that is kind of that those two
not surprised. Yeah.
But it's totally not surprising. But I think it's more the approach of the methodology, you know, of going about it. But those scenes are wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ainley's performance in this one is a little more reminiscent of Roger Delgado's performance as the Master than at any other point in Ainley's run as the Master. You know, it was almost unbelievable that he would be helping the Doctor, given his past history. You could believe Roger Delgado would in a situation like this. You could believe Michelle Gomez would in a situation like this. You probably wouldn't believe John Sim would. And you certainly wouldn't believe Sacha Dhawan would.
Yeah.
And so Ainley is one of those where you, based on his performance up till now, you wouldn't expect him to roll back that way. But given the history with the Time Lords and everything, maybe there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it did also create a sense of mystery with those two characters and their relationship that wasn't settled, which is great. It's like, okay, there's something here. And I love how and from what I understand, it was sort of a flippant sort of ad lib that sort of ended up in, but Pertwee referring to him as his best enemy.
Oh, right.
I thought that was like the best. I'm like, okay, that's really cool, right? Just these nice little throwaway lines. It makes up for the terrible easy as pie lines later.
Not the mind probe. Yeah, I mean, there are a few, but they become part of the reason why we all have fun with it too. So like
Yeah.
that's yeah, but yeah.
Well, speaking of enemies, in addition to shoehorning in a bunch of companions, we've shoehorned in a bunch of classic Doctor Who monsters and at least one new one. So we had a Yeti appearance. We obviously had a Dalek. We had this new Raston Warrior robot. That was pretty cool. I will just say for myself, as much as I love the Cybermen, Eric Sayward overused them, and I think they were overused in this story. I think having the Cybermen in there and being a threat is good, but I felt like at least one of their points in the story, they could have been replaced by someone else like Sontarans. That wasn't included in the story.
I think you got a point in that there's definitely room for there maybe shoehorn in one other like group of monsters. We talked about monsters before too. Yeah, it's almost like in a certain sense, the Five Doctors becomes really primarily a Cyberman story if you're looking at it the way we often do, where we categorize like, well, what's the villain? It's almost like it's a Cyberman story, which is weird. But this Arrow, you're right, is very heavy on that. And they are, and I can see too. I mean, I don't let any of it affect. I'm certainly going to continue to revisit this for the rest of my life, so that's fine. But I can also see the argument can be made that this story takes a lot of their strength away. They're really reduced to just being like a bunch of mannequins that can be knocked over by the guy in the tights with the arrows.
Oh yeah,
and it's like, all right, that's a little silly. But
yeah, and I know that Terrence Dix in interviews had said like, yeah, he didn't like that Sayward enjoyed that Sayward was pro Cyberman. So, you've got the easiest pie scene where they just blunder into the chessboard and get shot down. And then I love the Raston Warrior robot scene because it's not even trying to be like, okay, how do we outthink it? It's just down, down, down. I mean, it's silly and it's cheap, but I love it because it stops that storyline dead in its tracks.
I also think they used them probably because from a budget standpoint, it was easier for those costumes to be made and put actors in. So I kind of look at it from that point of view. But one of the great things that I think where the story kind of fails a little, and this is just a personal preference, although the Daleks are not my favorite, villain, I really wanted more Daleks in it. I mean, you've got, 20 years of Doctor Who, and the main villain just gets, pushed down a hallway, and that's it, right? It would have been nice to have more Daleks. Just saying.
Although, knowing what we know of the Time War, maybe we don't want to have too many Daleks on Gallifrey.
Yeah, but even if it's just a section of like 3 or 4, right? That'd be fine.
I wonder how much of it was dealing with Terry Nation and rights issues, because I know that Terrence Dix, the original script, they didn't want a Dalek, and Terrence insisted we need a Dalek. And I'm sure that he wrote something for 3 or 4, and Nation was like, okay, here are the rights. Well, how much for one? Okay, and they agreed to that. Because I like the fact that even though having one Dalek against 2 people can be scary, that whole sequence just seemed to end a little too easily. You know what I mean? It's let's push them into a mirror and watch the lasers and watch it destroy itself.
Michael mentioned the Time War, and it's worth bringing up too that another thing this did, in the same way that some of us were earlier talking about the Three Doctors, is how this continues as an anniversary show to really build on the mythology of Gallifrey and give us a lot of stuff that they can then, as we were saying earlier too, could mine it for other things, like the more of the history of Rassilon and the general corruption and decadence and just altogether not niceness of Time Lords, where you really have to realize that you can't trust these people for anything. And like you go forward in time to things like Timothy Dalton in the modern show, and it's like all the DNA is being laid out here. These people are not to be trusted. They can be deeply corrupt and horrifying, and And I guess this fits into the Time War too, doesn't it? Because as long as the Daleks are around, we can probably fit this into the whole timeline of it all, right?
Well, and season 20, if you think about it, really is end capped by corruption of Gallifrey stories. So we started with Arc of Infinity, we ended with the Five Doctors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Time Lords are so clearly like the villains in this piece, in this story for me and Barusa, that it almost doesn't matter to me what monsters end up in the Death Zone, because like they're just the tools of the Time Lords. They're like, oh, you got a sword this time, or it's a gun, it's a Dalek. Like they're just a danger to be put in the path. But the real interest of the story is just the corruption and, like you said, the decadence of this society that thinks it's so superior and so supposed to be in charge of everything.
Yeah, you have to wonder about a race that when they discover time travel, they don't just rely on it for like exploring and learning. It's like they develop a device that pulls other races in, decides, hey, let's watch them fight for our entertainment, and then at some point says, oh, well, we won't do that anymore, but we'll keep the technology around anyway. Like that's a big warning sign right there.
And although they're Time Lords in this story, obviously everything being metaphorical, you just watch and you think, yeah, this is very, very human. This makes total sense. Just gladiatorial games all over again, watching people's misery for fun. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. The Doctor becomes like increasingly during the course of the whole history of the series, so obviously a major like ripple in the history of the Time Lords and an outcast, to be someone that actually has their longevity and their perspective and their abilities, and yet has the capability of empathy. And even when you meet nice Time Lords, sometimes they still really don't get it. A lot of them still feel, well, yeah, but we're Time Lords. And the Doctor's like, everybody's okay. You know, people are good. I'd like to meet other people. And it's kind of interesting. I know that in the old days, I remember a lot more people used to, they probably still do. I just remember seeing a lot of articles in the old days where people would talk a lot more about the differences in Doctor Who related to American science fiction, like Star Trek and other things, and how different sensibilities reflect themselves, like American and British sensibilities. It's fascinating to have a series where you have your main heroic character be like a dissident and an outcast who, like I keep saying, shows empathy for other people. And then your anniversary shows are about continuing to reveal the massive corruption at the core of that character's race and origins, and saying, by the way, here's some more stuff about how the planet that the Doctor came from is terrible. Happy anniversary. And it's like, it's really interesting. But it just, in a way, just winds up underlining the Doctor is really good. And it's like all the more a triumph that the Doctor is good, because look how awful everything is where the Doctor came from. And we keep seeing that go on in future stories too.
You know, and what you say there about the Doctor having like an empathy that the other Time Lords don't seem to have, Chris Chibnall's given us a possible explanation for why.
Yeah.
And the thing with Cybermen stealing Time Lord DNA in the latest episode was apparently kind of based on one of the original scripts for this episode, that they went in a different direction.
Very interesting. I didn't come across that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too, is that it's interesting. You look at the vast scope of a show that's now lasted over a half a century, like so many of our like the venerable sci-fi institutions and everything. You think hundreds, if not thousands, of people of all different levels of creativity working on this stuff. None of this is meant to be consistent. The biggest traps that fans fall into is saying, oh, wait a minute, continuity. It's like, look, people have been making this thing for like over 50 years. It's not consistent. But what's amazing is how consistent it actually is, and how like certain themes get picked up and continued, and how at the core of it, a lot of writers are dedicated to, now we want to kind of maintain a through line here of why this character is moral and ethical and why we all think this character is great. And a lot of it works. And this is a major, Five Doctors is a major piece of that ongoing mythology and really redefining the character. And like, even not to rush us to the end, but like even right to the end, where they basically reiterate his origin by saying he's going to go do it again, he's running away again, is to basically draw that line under him and say, this is why the Doctor is a hero. This is why we like the Doctor. And that's in a way, that's the best thing you can do for an anniversary, is say, let's celebrate why this character means so much to us. And we're done.
No.
Well, and Arnold, you were saying that bit at the end, that was another of those wonderful moments with the current TARDIS team, especially between Tegan and the Doctor. You're going to go off in your rackety old TARDIS and abandon your own people? Why not? That's how it all started.
Yep.
And that's how we go out. I mean, that was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought that the Hartnell clip at the beginning was terrific.
Yeah.
And for most of us, that was like, ooh, wait a minute. That's what he looked and sounded like, So that was pretty cool. And it was just right,
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool one, because I think I saw 5 Doctors before 3 Doctors. I'm pretty sure that I did.
I
Just by the way.
certainly saw 5 Doctors before I saw Dalek Invasion of Earth, which is where that clip is from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did too. Yeah.
And this was my intro to Troughton. I mean,
Yep.
I know I saw this before I saw any of Troughton's actual stories. And for me, I know fans at the time, another thing too is the fans always have something to complain about. And I know there are people that are like, oh, Richard Herndl, it's not the same. And for me, he is the first Doctor I encountered. So it doesn't really feel inconsistent to me either. And now, of course, we're in the David Bradley era. It's like people have gotten used to this now. So It's not a problem. It's like certain traits carry over through that incarnation. It's like, so I was introduced to a lot of them through this. And from the clip at the beginning is also that nice little subtle touch at the end where the end credits start with the original theme and then slowly segue into the 80s Peter Hal version of the theme.
Mhm.
It's all these nice little touches that make this such a great special story. It's really, really nicely done.
I think I had seen the 3 Doctors prior to the 5 Doctors, but I think that's the only Troughton I had seen. So Jamie and Zoe this was, I think, the first time I saw them on screen. So
Yeah, and that scene is just so emotionally affecting, even for how brief it is. Just the way Troughton plays his sorrow at realizing they're not real, they've forgotten him. It's beautiful.
Are we going to talk about all the craziness that started because of these stories with the season 6B stuff, or are we just going to go over it and forget that?
I
That really
kinda
kicks off a 2, I think. The 2 Doctors, I think, really. So
I kind of do like the idea, just to digress a little bit, of Series 6B, because first it puts a lot of things in perspective, and secondly, it's just it's kind of a I'm a sucker for things that could. I have a very fan fiction mind, so it's like I could see them using Troughton's Doctor, and then eventually he turns into Pertwee. But I also think that I know there are people who've complained about certain continuity issues, like how could the second Doctor know about Jamie and Zoe? It's like, look, they're all together, they're all sharing the same mind. Just roll with it. It's about an alien individual in a magic box that can go anywhere. Trust us, you're okay. Let it go.
Yeah. There's all kind of ways you can come up with explanations. You don't even need to bother. But it's, I mean, I don't mind it. Belabor that point for another minute. I don't mind it so much if it's fun. Like if people like coming up with all that and it's fun, and that's the whole experience of sort of the world of fanfic, which I think also is there really is no separation. Fanfic is just also storytelling. I mean, the fact that gets put in a box is itself a problem. Besides, most of the hugest successes in the world right now, from so many things started as fanfic, different franchises and the Outlanders of the world, speaking of Jamie. But I think that if it's fun, it's fine. Once it starts becoming a problem or people start complaining or arguing about it, then it's let it go. Just let it go. But for some people, the intellectual exercise is fun. I want to try to make this work and fit. Fine. If you enjoy that, that's great. And the whole 6B thing provides a neat little way that you can have fun with it and see, oh, that's how this all works. And that part I've always liked. I've kind of liked that too. So I could see where you can enjoy that. But it also never bothered me all that much either.
Yeah, I'm fine with, suspending disbelief for the sake of fun.
Mhm.
Having said that, the comedic timing of the Tomorrow's Times, thing with the Brigadier, that was just genius. That was just,
Lovely.
that was just a hoot,
Yeah. It's also nice to see that they haven't forgotten about time travel ripple effects and things, as well as things happen as these doctors are being scooped out of time. Peter Davidson's doctor is feeling it.
Yeah.
And this is a doctor who we've seen that sort of vulnerability in before, even back in Castrovalva. So it's kind of nice to see some continuity there.
Mhm.
Speaking of the scoop, the piece of merch that I wish existed in the world is that little board game with all the little different figurines. I want it.
I believe those
years ago-
figurines they used were actual figurines that were being sold by a company, like collectible
Wasn't it
figurines.
through a DVD limited run?
Well, the
This
original
is
ones were owned by a
pre-DVD.
collector a little while ago. I don't remember who, and I don't remember if it's still the same person, but someone actually had, at least at one point, the screen used figures, which is like
Right.
one of the ultimate collectibles to have for the
Right.
show. But yeah, we should all get to have our own Death Zone game. Put everybody on there.
I
complete
actually
with
want,
little wrist mover,
I actually want the little table thing with the pyramid and the old high Gallifreyan, just to have in
Yes.
my
Oh,
living
yeah.
room.
Just to
Because
have it sit there.
I love the interplay of the three doctors in that scene. The first, second, third. Because I
Yeah.
think the fifth is coming in with Barusa, but I like that they're kind of
Yeah.
fighting over who knows how we can translate this. And then, as I believe it's Sarah, I think it's as I think I forget who comes in, but the third doctor says, "You'll have to excuse me. I got to help these two figure
Right.
this all out." Which
Yeah.
I mean, I just love the humor, which is very light, but it's very necessary in a story like this.
I always liked the fact that the core three, even though Herndl is new to this one, felt like they were continuing the dynamic from the three doctors. And there's
Mhm.
sort of like this continuing thing. I mean, really, it's these two in quick succession that establish this weird idea that we kind of stick with even to Day of the Doctor, which I also love a lot,
Mhm.
which is that somehow versions of the Doctor are going to fight with each other and bicker, which is kind of weird when you really think about it. But on another hand, it isn't weird because you think, well, if you met yourself, you'd probably be mad at the things you've done that like are mistakes or something. But it's nice to see that continue in this one, is like those three are still the same ones, still not quite working together. And then you put Davison in the mix. It's really the Three Doctors 2.0 with a little extra
And the
doctor.
first doctor still tries to be the adult in the room and rein them in
Yes.
when need be, too. It
Yes, exactly.
was
They're
kind of
like the
nice
two
too
brothers.
that the first doctor who ultimately figures out what Rassilon's game is and figures out the solution. The other doctors are ready to make the wrong choice there.
One
Almost.
of the things that's it's always been weird to me, and again, not in a way that's bad, just it's strange, and it's like part of the weird mind-bending stuff of Doctor Who, is that it's the first Doctor who is the senior member here, treated like the father figure by everyone, treated with the most respect as if he's the one with the most knowledge and expertise, and the one that the show, I think quite rightly for the anniversary, gives the honor of being the one to figure it all out and like school the others. Meanwhile, he's the kid. He's the youngest one in the room. And yet,
much like the War Doctor with
Yeah.
David Tennant and Matt Smith.
yeah, it's like, but because he looks like an old man,
Yeah.
he takes that role and they all defer to him like he is the old man. You know what I used to think, actually, I just remember this now, talking about fanfic. I haven't thought of this for years. I remember that I had come up in my own head with this idea, and I don't know if other fans had written about it too. Maybe the idea is sort of that every time after the initial regeneration, your mind is not the same anymore. And maybe the argument could be made that the Hartnell incarnation, the first one, at least the first one in this cycle, now that we know there's obviously there are a lot more before that, but this first one, quote unquote, was like more sensible or had more of his faculties together, and regeneration slowly degrades that over time, maybe, which might be why they're deferring to him for that knowledge.
Might
That was
explain why
something I used to have in
Barusa's
my head.
might
Yeah.
explain why Barusa's taken the turn he has in
Yes.
the Five Doctors, because this is a later incarnation. This is
Yeah.
the fourth actor to play Barusa on screen since he was introduced in The Deadly Assassin. So it would follow that theory. He's in a later incarnation. He's becoming
Right.
brain damaged from this, and his Alzheimer's is making him do bad
I
things.
know that's something we haven't dealt with a lot. It would be kind of interesting. This idea that like continued regeneration might actually be akin to like a degenerative disease or something. We've seen stories like that.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that puts a
Yeah.
whole new light on Romana's.
And the
Well,
Valley Art.
if I may
Oh,
make
Romana, yeah.
Yeah, already that scene with her burning through her regenerations is just like, damn, Romana. But
let me put maybe a more positive spin on it.
Sure.
Maybe the fact that the Doctor is accumulating memories, so every regeneration, his brain doesn't quite rewire in the same thing. I mean, I can remember what I had for dinner when I was 8 years old on August 5th, but I can't remember that now because I'm older, and regeneration
Oh, yeah.
kind of, to use a later example, deep breath. The Capaldi's Doctor does not remember Madame Pompadour and the Clockwork Robots. So I think it's more of a reshuffling, and certain memories just get
Sure.
forgotten.
I
And
can
that
see that.
Time Lord brains don't work that way.
The speed of my thought for logical processing and stuff was certainly more 30 years ago. I could run
Mhm.
rings around myself mathematically then compared to now. Absolutely. All right. Anything else we want to say about the Five Doctors here?
Other than the terrible nursery rhyme earworm that they created that we all remember, 40 years later. Thanks, guys.
I'm still choosing between above, between below. I have to.
Mhm.
It's just
Mhm.
something you do
Yep.
whenever you face a crisis in life.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to add. I think maybe one other little thing I would say is I think it may not seem like the most obvious choice, but I think that often the Five Doctors could be on short lists of a great episode to give someone who's never seen Doctor Who before.
I think so too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that may sound, well, I mean, obviously you agree, but I mean, it may sound odd because it really seems like a story that assumes you know what's going on. I say, depending on the type of person you're giving it to, if there's someone that can roll with like going in the deep end, this is a great crash course in a lot of stuff, and it may wash over you, but if you're going to like it, this is going to inspire you to seek out more of it and find out what it all means. It's a good start.
Yeah, it certainly made me want to be way more excited about seeing the second and first Doctor stories than I normally would have. And the black and white didn't scare me. It was just the in 1983, the quality of whatever copies were available was just garbage, right? It made me want to like squint through those really terrible copies of those videos that were around, right? And it was nice to get a glimpse into those worlds, like, ooh, a Yeti, I've heard about that, right? And it was just nice to be able to put that with the imagery. And even even with the fake first Doctor, and I know we touched upon this as well, it felt right. I mean, it just felt like the same sort of attitude of the first Doctor. So it was like really good at, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it, putting the exclamation point for me as, okay, I'm invested in the show, right? I'm not just a fan of like one particular Doctor or one particular era. This is paying off into me wanting to take this further, right? And, one of the revelations of doing this panel that I hadn't really realized until I signed up for it is like, wait a minute, the Five Doctors is 40 years old. I've been doing this for 40, I was just like, I've spent most of my adult life like investing in this program and its characters and its mythos. And this sort of embodies that. Like Five Doctors kind of somehow embodies like my fandom for it.
Yeah, I'm not at all financially invested in it at all, am I?
No.
Yeah. I was going to say too, since you're talking about Gateway stories, there is a panel on that for Console Room for this year that will also be recorded and available as part of the virtual panel setup this year. So look for that on the schedule if you're interested in that. My wife's going to be participating in that one. All right. Well, thank everyone for being here for this panel celebrating 40 years of the 5 Doctors. And again, I'm Michael. I'm going to be pretty involved on the Discord during the virtual convention. So if you want to do any follow-up or have any questions or just need help navigating the Discord, come find me on there. Anybody else have anything you want to promote here?
Come chat with me on the Discord. You can follow me at writing-related activities at Tumblr.
You can check out Chicago Doctor Who Meetup on Facebook and at Who Meetup on Twitter.
I'll say check out atvpublishing.com and my comic strip at picklesandbean.com. I will definitely try to participate in the Discord stuff when it happens. I like to be able to actually chat with some folks. And you can also find me on post.news as the social media universe erupts into multiple into a multiverse.
I'm also on Post. Do you like it?
I've been enjoying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have too. Yeah. So yeah, I'm on Post and Twitter and Facebook under my name. Although by the time this actually happens, will there be a Twitter? Yeah, so you can find me there and through NeedCoffee.com's podcast Weekend Justice and through the Modern Musicology podcast as well.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see you at other Console Room panels. Good night.